Okay, fellas, hear me out on this one. Turn-based strategy RPG meets MOBA. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including coverage of upcoming new releases, early access or otherwise, in the turn-based strategy genre, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. So you heard that right. Turn-based strategy meets MOBA. You know, it's not every day that someone approaches you to do a video on their game, and that is the headline. But that was the case here with Skygard Arena. And I have to say, I've actually been kind of surprised. Now, before we continue, I do need to mention that this is a sponsored video, so thank you to Gemelli Games for reaching out and being willing to sponsor me to check out Skygard Arena. Of course, as always, still all opinions in this video are my own. I will be open and honest about what I enjoy and do not enjoy, and overall, it's a lot more enjoy. So what is the idea behind Skygard Arena? It is a mix of a single-player campaign with online PvP that is separate and optional, but also uses all of the same mechanics. And it very interestingly blends your standard grid-based, turn-based abilities, basic attacks that you would expect to see from a Final Fantasy Tactics or a Tactics Ogre or a Sword of Convallaria, but with a character design and world design and style of abilities, as well as objectives that are much more reminiscent of the MOBA genre. Now I, if you didn't know, am actually a former longtime player of League of Legends. I've also played a lot of Heroes of the Storm with some of my buddies back in the day. So I'm actually pretty familiar with the genre, even if I'm pretty out of touch nowadays. I still spent a lot of my life on League of Legends. So I am actually familiar with this side of Skygard Arena as well. Now, if you're someone who does not enjoy MOBA style combat, that is not something you have to worry about here. You're not clearing creeps, you're not managing lanes, destroying towers. This is through and through a turn-based strategy title. We're going to go through how combat works, what I think of the art style, the story, the gameplay, single player and multiplayer, and all of my thoughts to do with that. So settle in and let's talk Skygard Arena. First and foremost, we have to talk about the gameplay, and the gameplay is pretty dang compelling. I was not sure what to expect going into this title, but it very quickly became apparent that I'd be comfortable here. The idea is that every character you can use has two major classes currently that they are able to utilize, called personas, as well as a number of artifacts for each class that you can switch between that provide a variety of very powerful effects. Now, as this is an early access title, I would not be surprised that there are going to be more personas and more artifacts that are released alongside more characters as the game goes through development. But even now, it gives a very healthy amount of combat variety, especially as you begin mixing and matching your members of your team. You can have 3 characters on your team in both the single player and PvP modes, and you're able to mix and match between them based on what mode you're playing. As you play PvP, you'll unlock characters through mastery trees, and as you play through the campaign, you'll unlock characters related to the story. As far as character archetypes are concerned, this is where you do see a little bit more of the MOBA influence. You're not changing jobs, you're not learning skills. Each character has their set class, they have their set skills, and they tend to fill archetypes that you'll be familiar with if you've played plenty of MOBAs. You have your standard archer with a long-range, single-target, piercing, high-damaging attack, mobility options, the ability to crit to herself and her allies, a standard roguish duelist that's able to navigate over terrain, get refreshed abilities if he gets a kill with his basic attack, throw poison around. A tanky panda who can actually use the earth to shove enemies into each other, into the terrain to deal extra damage, jump on enemies' heads to push them and deal damage, regenerate her own HP based on the enemies around her. And those are just the basic abilities that these characters have on their starting classes. As you get deeper and you find other different types of characters, paladins and clerics and wizards, and unlock all the different personas, you see that there's actually a good amount of variety even just in the characters themselves. Every character has a basic attack, what tends to be some sort of support or extra bonus damage option and a mobility option generally, as well as one ultimate ability that will charge over time. There are no ability cooldowns here, unlike things in MOBAs, so if you dislike that, then you're in luck here. Although you are only able to use one of your 2 secondary abilities any given turn. You kind of have to choose what one you need at any given moment when and where the opportunity calls for it. Now, as far as those ultimate abilities that I mentioned, this is where things get interesting. They have a charge time, getting 1 point of charge per turn, and every ability has a different amount of charge that it needs before you can use it. The lowest I've seen thus far has been 5, and the highest is 9. So you might think, well, it's a hell of a long time to be waiting to be able to charge up to use an ultimate ability. It has to be really strong. And yes, you are right, and the ultimate abilities do tend to be extremely strong. I mean, take, for example, our archer here, who has this massive, hugely damaging AoE arrow storm that she's able to drop on the battlefield once it's charged up. It's pretty nice. However, you also are able to charge your ultimate by 2 points per each of these orbs that you can pick up around the battlefield, which spawn typically every turn. Some missions have different requirements that make them spawn at like different boss HP thresholds, things like that. But either way, when you pick up one of these orbs, you get 2 points towards your ultimate ability, and I mean, that can stack up really quickly. Now, of course, this does mean that you're going to be highly encouraged to stay mobile, use your mobility tools to get around the battlefield quickly, snap up the ability to charge your ultimate, and get big damage or other effects out there. This is easier said than done, as most characters have a minimum of 2 to maybe 4 movement naturally, so it can actually take a little bit of doing to be able to move around successfully unless you're spamming abilities that allow you to do so, and that means that those abilities are very valuable. So, of course, you have all these different abilities, different character classes, different types of skills that push, pull, deal damage, knock things around, apply status effects, move you around. But what types of missions are you going to be going through when you're actually using these abilities? Well, this is one of the things that I was not expecting, and I'm very pleased by. The campaign has a fairly decent amount of mission variety based on what I've been able to play thus far. From just raw, clear all the enemies maps, to take and hold objective points where you have to clear towers and then take them for yourself and keep the enemy off of them, to defeating a certain boss, to just holding the line for X amount of turns. There's been a healthy variety of missions in the campaign. Now, as far as what multiplayer is going to look like, well, we'll talk about that when we get into the specific multiplayer section, because there was a little bit of an issue there. But as far as the campaign is concerned, I've already seen a very nice amount of variety for missions, and I can only hope that that continues going forward. It's meant that every time I've gone into a mission, I've had to kind of think about, okay, what characters do I actually need here? What classes that they have would be the most beneficial? What artifacts that they have on those individual classes would be the most beneficial? And how are they going to synergize together? Because there is a lot of team synergy that you're going to want to be focusing on to find success as you get into some of the harder missions. That might not seem accurate at first if you decide to pick up Skygard Arena and check it out for yourself, as some of the early missions are very easy. They're very simple, get you into the game with tutorialization. But there's a wall that we'll talk about. We'll talk about it in my overall experiences, where suddenly you need to care a whole lot about your characters and their abilities and what they can do. So thus far, the gameplay sounds pretty decent, right? But what about the other aspects of the game? Visuals, audio design, OST, story. Let's talk about all that now. Visually, the game's pretty clean. You know, if you don't like that sort of MOBA art style, then this may not be for you. But as someone who has played plenty of those types of games, it's something I'm familiar with and that I do enjoy. Not every game needs to have the very crisp, stylized graphics of something like FFT's character designs, or more dark and gritty, brooding, more realistic things along those lines. Colorful, cheerful, bright designs and environments are fine as well. And I think, as far as that's concerned, these character designs are pretty good. I kind of really like them. They're very easily identifiable. They've got a lot of variety that shows off the different factions and countries that each character comes from. And the animations themselves have actually been pretty dang solid thus far. Like, I've actually really enjoyed watching this game in motion. And, you know, not every strategy RPG or just turn-based strategy game in general can say that. So, hey, big props there. Sound design is pretty good. Big attacks feel appropriately impactful. Moving around, crunching of leaves, different noises and callouts of characters are all quite appropriate for what I would expect. If anything, it's really the OST and the story that are the lowest points for me. There's been a couple bangers on the OST, and I do find myself humming along here and there, but it's nothing incredibly standout. It's just good. The story is probably the weakest aspect. I would say if you're going to check out Skygard Arena, you're doing so more for the gameplay than you are for the story, but it serves its purpose. It sets up the world, it introduces the characters, the central conflict of this grand tournament to prevent future wars by passing the crown of power around between different factions. But then you have kind of some subversive action behind the scenes where things maybe aren't what they seem. It's standard stuff. It does what it needs to do. It's not bad. It's just not the main draw. You're not looking at an FFT tier story here. Having talked about all the major aspects of the game as a whole, there might be one thing that you feel like we're missing out on here, and that is the mentioned multiplayer. Multiplayer is obviously going to be a big draw for this game. There's options for matchmaking, private matches against friends, there's mastery tiers. I imagine that there's going to be a lot that you can do here with the system. But unfortunately, in the build of the game that I was playing, presumably because it's not even in early access yet, servers probably aren't even online, I was not able to test the PvP myself. But what I was able to do was play a number of campaign missions where you're playing against champions and characters that are playable champions and characters. So it kind of gave an idea of how things would shake out. Now, it's not exactly the same, of course, as these campaign missions have like nameless generics that have their own abilities that actually comprise armies you have to navigate around, a more traditional turn-based, story-based battle system, but you're still able to see what these characters are going to be able to do and how your characters are going to be able to interact with them. So I have an idea of how these PvP battles could go, and I gotta say, I'm kind of excited. Again, I have a lot of friends that I've played a lot of MOBAs with over the years, and most of those friends are also the people I grew up playing and talking about turn-based strategy RPGs with. So there's a good overlap there, and I'm excited to be able to go in with some of those friends and actually see how the PvP functions. You know, in matchmaking, are we going to wind up seeing situations where people very quickly find the most broken combos and then balancing is required? Most likely, because that's how all these types of things go. But even just from a friendly versus standpoint, I think it could have some fun options there. Especially as over the course of early access, again, new characters, new classes, new artifacts are potentially added, which I hope they will be. Overall, as far as my experience has been concerned, I've definitely been enjoying it. Of course, again, Skygard Arena, it's an early access game. There's going to be some bugs, there's some quality of life things I'd like to see added, updated, changed, etc. That's not surprising, it's the nature of the game. But considering that I was kind of skeptical going in, seeing as how this is a mixing my chocolate with your peanut butter situation that I've never really expected to see, I came out the other side enjoying my time. It was fun theorizing different builds and figuring out different strategies, seeing what other types of classes and abilities would be unlocked as I played through the campaign, and I was generally enjoying learning the game until I got up to a particular boss fight that suddenly kicked my teeth in. I'm not kidding when I say that this fight was brutal. And again, as an early access title, there's definitely some things I would recommend changing for this mission, as there's a big focus on picking up those super energy orbs because they give you healing in said mission. And the boss does a huge amount of damage and damage over time, as well as having a lot of HP and generic mook reinforcements. As such, being able to position and pick up orbs and planning your moves ahead of time so you can actually get what you need to keep your characters alive, as there's no way to revive in the mission, is of absolute crucial importance. However, there's undisclosed health thresholds that the boss can hit, where more enemies will spawn, and the orbs will change position, which can very easily throw off your planning and positioning if you're not careful. Combine that with the fact that the spawning of the orbs across the mission in general is random, and it can be very hard to actually be able to make a proper plan to find success. That said, the fight itself is really interesting. It's a compelling boss fight that really made me actually sit down and think about what my characters were capable of, and I came out the other side a much stronger player for it. Then after that, you have this big swarm mission that I'm currently on at time of recording, where you have a big boss character, a group of allied generics, and an allied champion that you have to protect, and you have to hold the line for a certain number of turns as an absolute insane swarm of enemies crushes into you. And it doesn't feel unfair, but it does feel threatening, because the enemy generics are not weak by any means. You're not carving through them like the Dynasty Warriors game. You actually have to think about your moves. You actually have to think about what you're doing, what threats you're handling, what damage your characters are going to be able to take. It was fun. Like, I hit that first boss fight, and suddenly everything was very compelling. So I'm excited to see what else the campaign has on offer, both after I record the video and play more, and once the early access period has started. If anything that I've said today is of interest to you, Skygard Arena is out now in early access today, November 18th, if you're watching this on day of release on Steam. You can go check it out. It's at least worth a look. I think if you're interested in the art style or the way the gameplay functions, you want to see where this game can go, where Gemelli Games can take it, I definitely recommend keeping an eye on it, because I certainly will be. I'll have a link to the game's Steam page in the description here. Go check it out, see what you think. It might wind up being more to your taste than you would expect. I'll definitely be watching this one going forward. With that said, though, I'm going to start wrapping this one up here. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.